The reason your mind won't settle may be the effort itself. Every technique, every attempt to force the calm, adding noise where you wanted silence. 2,500 years ago, a monk brought this exact experience to the Buddha. He'd gone to meditate alone in a mango grove, certain he was ready, and came back more scattered than when he left. The answer the Buddha gave him is in this video. By the end of these 10 stories, 3 things will be yours. Understanding why the harder you grip stillness, the further it retreats, and what happens when the grip releases. The sight of people who stopped trying and found in the stopping what years of effort couldn't reach. And a recognition that stillness was always already there, beneath the effort to reach it. Others may sense the third before you do. If you've ever lain awake trying to make your thoughts stop, these stories are yours. The teaching on meditation is not about becoming something other than you are. It is about ceasing the effort to escape what you already are. You'll hear a kitchen worker who couldn't read a single word reach what scholars spent lifetimes failing to find. A man his community had written off, sitting with a piece of cloth, arriving somewhere nobody expected. A prince swimming alone in an open ocean for 7 days because stopping wasn't something he could choose. Settle in wherever you are. Dim the light if you can. From every part of the world tonight, you are welcome here. The first story is about a monk who found the most peaceful place he had ever seen, sat down to meditate, and couldn't stop thinking. His name was Meghiya, and he was the attendant of the Buddha, the one who walked beside him, carried his robe, kept the small details of the day in order. He had been doing this work for months, learning what he could not yet reach on his own just by being near it. He watched the older monks move through the day with a kind of peace he could not name. Present without being stiff, steady without any visible effort. He wanted that. He wanted it so much that the wanting had become its own kind of noise. And then one morning, walking back from the village with his alms bowl, he passed a mango grove by the river. The trees stood close together, their canopy so thick the light came through soft and green. The river ran along one edge, quiet and unhurried. There was a smell to it, cool and sweet, reaching you before you were close enough to know where it came from. Meghiya stood at the edge of that grove and felt something shift in his chest. This was the place. He was sure of it. Here, alone with the river and the trees, away from the noise of the camp, his mind would finally do what he had been trying to make it do for months. It would go still. He had tried to meditate before, many times, in many different places. His thoughts were always with him, arriving as reliably as he did. But standing at the edge of that grove, he let himself believe that perhaps what had been missing was simply the right place. Here, surely, was that place. He did not yet understand that the mind does not settle because the surroundings are peaceful. The mind settles because certain conditions have been met, and those conditions were not in the grove. He went to the Buddha and asked to spend the afternoon there. The Buddha said, "Wait a little. We are alone here, and I have no other attendant." Meghiya heard this. He waited. Then he asked again. The Buddha gave the same answer. The third time, Meghiya said something that seemed to him completely fair. "You yourself, Lord, have nothing more to do, but I still need to work on my mind, and the conditions there are beautiful." He was asking for permission to try harder. The Buddha looked at him and said, "Since you speak of working on your mind, I will not hold you back. Go, Meghiya." So he went. He found a good place to sit at the foot of a tree. He arranged his robe. He closed his eyes and waited for the grove to give him what it had seemed to promise from a distance. What came instead was his mind. First, the wanting. The ordinary kind. Small comforts he had not thought about in months arrived with a sharpness that felt almost like an insult. Food, warmth, a face he had not called to mind deliberately, but which appeared anyway, vivid and uninvited, in the middle of what was supposed to be an afternoon of practice. Then the anger, quieter than rage, the small resentments the mind keeps on file. A slight from last week, something said carelessly, a situation that had gone the wrong way. These did not arrive as memories he was replaying. They arrived as feelings, tight, sudden, like something that had been waiting a long time and had now decided to speak. And then something harder to name. The private unkindness a mind will show when no one is watching. Thoughts he would not have said aloud. The small cruelties that live quietly at the edge of an ordinary mind. He tried to stop them. He pushed each thought back as it came. He returned to the breath. He tried the word no. He told himself, "This is not what I came here to think." And each time he did this, the thought came back slightly larger than before. This is what the mango grove could not have told him. What you pay attention to grows. The mind moves toward what it is pointed at, even the things it is pointed at in order to push them away. The afternoon passed. The light shifted in the canopy above him. The river kept moving at the edge of the grove. And Meghiya sat in the most peaceful, most carefully chosen place he had ever found, and felt his mind louder, more scattered, and more desperate for relief than it had been in months. When he walked back, he told the Buddha everything. The wanting, the anger, the unkind thoughts, the way pushing had made each one stronger, the way the grove, beautiful as it was, had made everything louder, not quieter. The Buddha listened. He was not disappointed. He received what Meghiya brought him the way he always received difficult things, with patience, and then with something useful. He said, "When the mind has not yet ripened, 5 things help it ripen." That word, unripe, is a kind word. It says, you are at a stage, not broken, not failing, just not yet ripe. A green fruit is not a bad fruit. It is a fruit that has not yet had what it needs. The noise in Megiya's mind was his mind asking, in the only way it knew how, for what it still needed. The 5 conditions are what it needed, and none of them could be found by sitting alone in a beautiful place and trying harder. The first condition is good friendship. Being near people whose steadiness helps you find your own. There is something you get from being near someone who has practiced for a long time that you cannot get from hearing about it. The way they hold disappointment, the way they listen when someone is speaking, the way they stay calm when things go wrong. You do not learn these things from hearing about them. You catch them the way you catch a habit from someone you spend a lot of time with. This is why friendship ripens the mind. When you are near someone whose mind is settled, something of their settledness gets into you. Their pace, their quality of attention, the way they hold their body when things are hard. You absorb it before you even notice. The practice travels from one person to another just by being near each other. Megiya had this. He had been walking beside it every single day, and he had walked away from it to sit alone in a grove. The second condition is ethics, the daily practice of paying attention to how you move through the world, how you speak to the people around you, what you take and what you give back, what you do when no one is watching. Ethics quiets the mind by giving it less to carry. When you live the day with some care, you arrive at the evening with a lighter mind, less unfinished business, less weight at the door of the practice. Everything unkind we have done in a day, every small dishonesty, every moment we chose what was easy over what was right, none of it disappears just because we sit down to be still. It surfaces. A person who has lived the day with some care arrives at stillness more easily. The silence is cleaner. Megiya had been living with care, but in his rush toward the grove, in the excitement of his own plan, he had stopped paying attention to how he was in the world around him. The third condition is wise conversation, talking with people about what really matters and listening when they do the same. The mind works through what it can speak. What we never say stays alive inside us, showing up as restlessness when we sit down to be quiet, looking for the attention it never got any other way. Megiya had been carrying something he had never said out loud. His frustration at watching others reach what he could not. He had not brought it to the one person most likely to help. He had gone to meditate it away instead. The fourth condition is effort, the right kind. Think of what happens when you try to fall asleep. The harder you try, the more awake you become. The effort itself is what keeps you awake. You cannot force sleep. You can only arrange the conditions and let sleep come. A restless mind is the same. Right effort means a patient return. You notice your attention has wandered, and you bring it back, gently, without blaming yourself for wandering, again and again, for as long as it takes, without war. Wrong effort fights what comes up. Right effort simply comes back to the practice. Apply your attention to what you are doing and let the thoughts do what they will. They will pass. They always do. The fifth condition is wisdom. Not wisdom as something you know. Wisdom as something you see directly in your own experience. the knowing, felt in the body, not just held in the head, that everything which appears will also pass. A thought of wanting comes up. You watch it. It passes. A feeling of anger comes up. You watch it. It passes. You do not need to destroy what comes up. You only need to see it clearly. That is enough. This kind of seeing does not come from deciding to believe that things change. It comes from watching. From staying with a thought long enough to see that it is already different from a moment ago, that it has edges, that it moves. Many people who try to meditate and find it makes things worse are fighting. They just do not know they are fighting. They treat every thought that comes up as a sign that something is wrong. But nothing is wrong when thoughts arise. That is what minds do. What goes wrong is the war we declare on them. The fifth condition asks you to put down the war and simply look. The thought comes. You look. The thought passes. You look again. What you are watching for is not peace. You are watching for the movement itself. The movement that shows you, this passes. It was always going to pass. And the watching, done with enough patience, becomes its own kind of freedom. This is what Meghiya found when he brought his experience back to the Buddha and was simply heard. In that moment, something in him settled. The teacher did not try to make his experience go away. He received it, named it, and showed Meghiya what it needed. That too is watching. You meet what is there. You do not fight it. And something, slowly, begins to ripen. Meghiya had tried to start with the fifth condition. He had skipped the soil and tried to grow the fruit in mid-air. You may know this feeling. The evening you decided to meditate on willpower alone, with no settling, no preparation, and found yourself 30 minutes later more restless than when you started. The walk in nature that became an hour of replaying the same conversation you were trying to leave behind. The quiet room that made the thoughts louder. A restless mind goes noisiest when everything around it goes quiet. It was always this busy. You just could not hear it before. And the instinct that follows is always the same. Try harder. Find a better place, a better method, more determination. But the harder you try, the more you are practicing the trying, which is the last thing a restless mind needs. What actually helps is rarely more effort. More often it is a conversation with someone you trust, a day spent trying to treat people a little more kindly, an evening near someone whose peace you can rest in for a while. The conditions come first. The stillness follows. The mango grove was beautiful. There was nothing wrong with it. What it could not give Meghiya was what he had decided he no longer needed. The steadiness of good friends, the lightness that comes from living carefully day by day, the conversations that let the mind put down what it is carrying before it sits down to be still. These are not preparation for the practice. They are the practice. The mind you bring is the mind you get. But the stories ahead ask a harder question. What happens when the conditions are not just missing, but taken? When someone else removes the ground from under you, without warning, and the question becomes how to stay standing. The ground can be taken in a single conversation. A door closes, a judgment is made, and everything you built is no longer available to you. This happened to a minister in an ancient kingdom. His name was Mahosadha, and in his time he was known as the wisest man in the kingdom of Mithila. The king he served, King Videha, had relied on him for years. Mahosadha had solved problems that no one else could solve. He had seen things others missed. He had kept the kingdom safe through situations that had seemed impossible to manage. And he had done all of this without making sure everyone knew it was him. When a problem was solved, he did not look for the credit. When the king needed truth instead of flattery, he gave truth. This kind of person is rare in any court, in any time. The other ministers of the court did not love him. They watched him receive the trust they had wanted for themselves. They watched the king turn to him first in times of trouble, and over time, the watching became something heavier and less clean. They began to find reasons to doubt him, small reasons at first, then larger ones. Then they began to bring these reasons to the king. They spoke of loyalty in a tone that made it sound dangerous. They raised doubts that could not be answered because they had never been clearly stated. They asked questions that were really suggestions. This is how suspicion spreads in a court. It does not come as accusation. It comes as concern. And concern is very hard to argue with. King Videha listened. He was not a bad man, but he was a man who could be moved by what he heard, and the ministers knew this. The whispering continued over weeks, then months. The king began to see his most trusted advisor through the lens that had been handed to him. The loyalty that had once seemed like devotion began to seem like strategy. The wisdom that had once seemed like a gift began to seem like a threat. One day, he called Mahosadha before him and told him to leave. He was to go from the capital. He was no longer welcome at court. He was given no reason, no chance to answer the accusations he did not know had been made. This is where the story turns. Mahosadha left. He did not argue. He did not demand to know who had spoken against him. He did not stand in the courtyard and make the king hear his side. He simply bowed, turned, and went. The people who loved him were confused. How could he go so quietly? How could he leave without a word of protest? They had expected something more. What they saw instead was a man walking away from everything he had built, with his hands open and his head level. Mahosadha settled in a village outside the capital. He lived simply. He did not speak of what had happened. He did not plan his return. He simply lived and watched and stayed clear. That is a very small sentence for what it describes. To live quietly after being pushed out of everything you had worked for, to not replay the scene at court, to not rehearse the conversation you should have had, to not spend your nights building the case for your own innocence. This is not the natural thing to do. It is the practice thing. It requires a particular relationship with your own mind. Meanwhile, in the capital, something was moving that no one had seen. The king of a neighboring land had been watching Mithila for a long time. He had studied its patterns, its weak points, the gaps in its defenses. And now, with Mahosadha gone from the court, he saw his moment. He sent King Videha a grand invitation, a gesture of friendship, a visit between kings, a chance for peace between their two kingdoms. The king, flattered and trusting, accepted. Mahosadha heard about this in his village. He heard about it the way you hear things when you are still and paying attention and not spending your energy on old wounds. And he understood immediately what the king and his ministers could not see. It was a trap. The invitation was not friendship. It was a plan to capture or kill the king and take the kingdom. He did not wait to be asked. He did not think, "They sent me away, so this is not my problem." He moved. Quietly, from outside the capital, he began to work. He sent word to people he trusted. He gathered what he needed to know. He made arrangements that moved around the danger rather than through it. He made sure that when the king traveled, there was a way out that the enemy had not expected. He worked without being seen, without asking for anything in return, without anyone knowing his hand was in it. Think about that for a moment. He was saving the man who had sent him away. Not because he expected to be rewarded. He moved because the moment called for it, and his mind was clear enough to see the moment. The trap was set, and then, at the moment it should have closed, it did not. The ways out that Mahosadha had arranged held. The king returned safely to his kingdom. When it became clear what had happened, and whose hand had been in it, King Videha came to Mahosadha himself. He came with shame and with apology. He had believed the lies. He had sent away the one person who could see what others could not. He asked Mahosadha to return. And then he asked the question that sits at the heart of this story. Why? Why had Mahosadha saved him? Why had he acted when the king had given him every reason to stay in his village and let the trap close? Mahosadha answered simply. "A mind full of hurt cannot see clearly," he said. "A mind that stays open can." Let us be careful about what this teaching is and is not. It is not the same as saying that everything happens for a reason. Buddhism does not teach that. Mahosadha did not believe the banishment was secretly good, or that some hidden plan had arranged it all to work out in the end. What he understood was something more practical. A mind gripped by anger or bitterness loses the ability to see what is actually there. Not because anger is bad, but because the mind has only so much room and anger fills it. Think of what anger does. Not the loud, sudden kind, the quiet kind, the steady kind, the kind that comes from feeling treated unfairly, from being pushed out, from watching someone believe something false about you. That anger is like a fog. It sits between you and whatever is in front of you. It keeps you in the event that hurt you, replaying it, pressing on it the way a tongue presses on a sore tooth. The fog narrows everything. The present moment gets small. Mahosadha did not press the sore tooth. He let the hurt be what it was, and he kept his mind free for what was in front of him. The word Buddhism uses for this is equanimity. It is often misunderstood as coldness or distance. Mahosadha was not cold. He loved the king. He cared about the kingdom. His equanimity was not distance. It was a different kind of care, one that kept his eyes open. Equanimity means keeping part of your mind free. The feeling is still there. The hurt is real. You simply do not build your home inside it. The teaching Mahosadha gives us is not comfortable. It asks something that can feel deeply unfair when you are in the middle of a hurt. It asks you not to fill yourself with the story of what happened. When someone takes something from us, a job, a friendship, a position we worked for, the trust of someone we loved, the mind wants to hold on. It wants to go over the details, to make sure the injustice is fully felt and fully counted. There is nothing wrong with this. It is a very human thing. But a mind full of repeating the story of what happened loses its view of the present moment. It stops noticing what is moving around it. It misses things. What would Mahosadha have seen if he had spent those months in bitterness? Less, much less. He would have been watching his own wound instead of watching the world. He would have missed the invitation. He would have missed the pattern. He would have missed the moment to act. You may have lived something like this. A painful event that at the time felt like a closing, like a narrowing of everything that had been possible, and which only later, much later, began to show a different shape. This is not because the world had a plan for you. It is because the conditions of your life kept moving. They kept changing. And when you were no longer pressed against the moment that had hurt you, you could begin to see the fuller picture. The early Buddhist teachers used a simple image for this. Look at a river. It looks the same from the bank. Always there, always moving in the same direction. But not a single drop of water that was there a moment ago is still there now. The river is made entirely of water that is passing through. Our life is the same. The situation that feels permanent is made of conditions that are passing through. The conditions are always moving. Nothing stays the way it is. The moment that felt like an ending was itself a condition arising. And like all conditions, it was already, at the moment it arrived, beginning to change. Mahosadha could not have known when he left the capital that he would save the king. He did not plan it. He did not wait for it. He simply kept his mind clear, and when the moment arrived, he was clean enough to see it. The mind that is still available, that has not been used up by grievance, can respond when something is needed. This is what equanimity is for, not comfort, availability. What Mahosadha did with his anger was this. He let it be there, and he did not build a house in it. But the next story is about something harder still. What happens when there is no ally, no way back, no ground to stand on, and you are completely alone? When no one is coming, and the only question left is whether you keep going anyway. Why are you swimming? The question came from the sea itself, or from what rose out of it. A presence at the surface, appearing in the way things appear when the mind has been pressed far enough that the usual boundary between the world and the self becomes thin. She looked at the man in the water. She saw what he saw: open ocean in every direction. No ship, no other survivors, no land, no light on any horizon, nothing to swim toward, and nothing to swim away from. There is no shore within sight, she said. There is no one coming for you. You have been in the water for 7 days. Why are you still swimming? The man's name was Mahosadha. This is his story. He had not always been in the ocean. He was the son of a king who had died too young, leaving behind a kingdom that had already moved on by the time the boy was old enough to understand what had happened. His uncle had moved quickly after the death. By the time Mahosadha was old enough to see the full shape of things, it had already been decided. The throne was not his. The court was not his. The life that should have been his was someone else's ordinary life, and had been for years. He had grown up with this knowledge as a kind of background sound, not a wound that bled openly, but something steadier and harder to put down. He knew what had been taken. He knew it was his. And somewhere in the years of growing up, without making a formal decision about it, he had decided that one day he would go and take it back. When he was old enough to act, he put together what little he had. Some money saved, a few trusted contacts from the old days when his father was alive, his father's name, which still meant something to people who remembered. He found passage on a merchant ship headed in the right direction. It was not a careful plan. He had no army and no political allies. He had a name, a direction, and the refusal to accept that the distance between him and what was his was permanent. The sea did not know about plans. 14 days into the voyage, a storm arrived. Not the brief kind that passes in an afternoon, the building kind, the kind that announces itself hours before it hits through a particular change in the light and the way the air suddenly goes still. The sailors knew what it meant. They worked through the night, doing everything that could be done. The ship held longer than it should have. Then the hull took water. The mast came down. In the space of a few hours, the ship stopped being a ship and became a collection of broken things in the dark water. Everyone on board went into the ocean. The first night in the water is something no set of words fully carries. There is the cold, not exactly cold, but a kind of pressure that comes at the body from every direction and does not stop. There is the dark, which removes all the usual reference points. There is the awareness of what is below you, depth that has no floor you can picture, something vast and alive and entirely indifferent to your presence. And there is the awareness that arrives with its own weight, slowly and then completely, that you are a very small thing in a very large place. Mahosadha swam. He was not alone in the water at first. The other passengers had gone in with him, and in those first hours there were voices across the water, people calling to each other, checking, keeping track. There is something those voices do, even in a desperate situation. They say, "You are not the last person. Someone else is here. The dark is not only yours. One by one, the voices stopped. Some had swum until the body simply could not be asked to continue. Some had reached a point in the water where a decision was made, not spoken, just made, that this was as far as they were going. A few had been taken by what lives in the deep water of the open sea. By the second morning, the sky was grey and flat and enormous, and Mahosadha was the only voice left. There was no one to call to, no one to confirm that he was still there. He kept swimming. There is something that happens in the open ocean alone that does not happen in ordinary life. The mind runs out of distractions. In an ordinary day, the mind is always managing something. A task coming up, a conversation from yesterday being replayed, a worry being turned over to see if it has changed since the last time it was turned over. Out there, with nothing in any direction, there is nothing to manage. There is only the body and the water and the question of the next stroke. The mind, stripped of everything it usually keeps itself busy with, is left with just itself. This can be unbearable. Mahosadha swam through it. He picked a direction by the feel of the water and the position of the sun when it was visible, not because he knew this was the right direction, but because having a direction is better than having none. Purposeless movement tires a person faster than purposeful movement. Even when the purpose is a guess, it holds the body together. The second day hurt more than the first. The third hurt more than the second. Somewhere in there, the body finds a different mode. Not comfortable, not easy, but no longer in full argument with what is being asked of it. A kind of grim cooperation between the will and the muscles. Just continue. Just the next stroke and the breath after it and the stroke after that. There was nothing to celebrate in these days and nothing to be ashamed of. Each day was just the continuation of the last one. The same water, the same horizon with nothing on it. The same question of whether to continue answered the same way each time, without drama, without inspiration, without anything that could be called a reason other than the simple fact that stopping had not yet been chosen. At night, with no sun to orient himself, he swam by the stars when they came through the clouds. They were a comfort, not because they told him where the shore was, but because they were familiar. He was still in a world he recognized, even if that world had reduced itself to water and darkness and the rhythm of his own arms. He did not swim toward anything specific. There was nothing to swim toward. He swam because stopping was a kind of choice, and he was not ready to make it. He swam the way a person breathes, not because they have sat down and decided to stay alive, but because the body and the will have not yet come to any other agreement. By the seventh day, something quieter had settled in. The body's argument against continuing had been made fully and refused fully enough times that there was nothing left to argue. The mind had run every version of the calculation and come back to the same place each time. What remained was not heroic. It was quieter than heroic. Just the next arm and the breath and the one after that. It was on the seventh day that she appeared. She came up from the water, or seemed to, By that point, the line between what was outside Mahosadha and what was inside him had become difficult to trace. But the question was clear. Why are you swimming? She was not unkind. She was curious in the way a very ancient mind is curious when it witnesses something it did not expect. She had watched human beings go into the ocean before. She knew how these situations tended to end. This man had been in the water for 7 days. He was still moving. There is no shore within sight, she said. No ship is coming. No one knows you are here. What is your reason for continuing? Mahosadha stopped moving for a moment. Not from doubt. He paused the way a person pauses before saying something that deserves to be said without rushing. The duty of those who are skilled, he said, is to make their full effort. That part belongs to me. Whether I reach the shore, that is not mine to decide. He started swimming again. It is worth staying with what he did not say. He did not say, I will reach the shore because I have worked hard enough for it. He made no claim about what the ocean owed him for 7 days in the water. He asked for no guarantee. He described 2 separate things, his effort and the outcome. His effort was his. The outcome was not. This is a very old and very precise idea in Buddhist teaching. Right effort, one of the 8 parts of the path the Buddha described, does not say that effort guarantees results. It says that effort is what lies within our power, and that bringing full effort to what is in front of us, without holding part of ourselves in reserve for a negotiation about whether it is worth it, is itself the practice, not the means to the practice. The practice. We tend to confuse effort and outcome. We measure the value of our effort by the result it produces. A good result. The effort was worth it. A poor result. The effort failed. This sounds reasonable, but it means our effort is never quite free. It is always attached to the outcome, always quietly asking, is this going to work? Is this worth everything I have? And when the answer is uncertain, we hold something back. Mahosadha's answer removes the condition. The effort and the result are 2 separate things. The effort belongs to you. The result belongs to the conditions. The web of causes moving around and through what you are doing, causes you did not start and cannot finish and do not control. Seeing this distinction clearly is what makes it possible to give your effort completely, without reservation, without requiring a guarantee before you commit. Buddhism names the holding back, the conditional effort, the self kept in reserve, as one of the ways suffering maintains its grip. We are half in until we know the result will be good, which means we are never fully in, which means we never discover what full presence might have made possible. The half in life is its own kind of loss. The people hearing this tonight have felt this moment, the moment when the outcome is completely uncertain and the question is whether to give everything anyway. Mahosadha's answer does not make the uncertainty go away. He is still in the ocean when he says it. The uncertainty is exactly as large as it was before. What he offers is not a removal of uncertainty. It is a different relationship to it. Bring everything, because it is yours to bring. You may know this from somewhere much closer than an open ocean. The effort you keep making in a direction where results are very slow to arrive. The care you keep bringing to something, a person, a practice, a version of yourself that does not seem to be improving in ways you can point to. The recovery you show up for each morning, even on the mornings when showing up feels like a performance of something you are no longer sure you believe. The relationship you keep tending to, even when the tending does not seem to reach the other person. The practice you return to, sitting down, trying to be still, even on the days when the stillness does not come. In all of these, the mind eventually asks the question the goddess asked. Why are you still doing this? There is no shore in sight. Nothing is changing. No one is coming to tell you that you are on the right track. What is the point of continuing? The answer Mahosadha gives is not the answer on a motivational poster. It does not promise the shore is there, just past where you can see. It says something more honest and more durable. The success is not yours to guarantee. The shore will be where it is. Your effort is yours, and the complete giving of that effort, without holding back, without making it conditional on visible progress, is itself the whole thing. Think about the cost of conditional effort. The part of yourself held in reserve, not yet committed, waiting to see whether this is going to work before you give everything. That reserved part takes energy to hold. It is always calculating, always watching for results, always ready to say, "See, it wasn't worth the full effort." That holding back is its own kind of suffering, the suffering of a person who was never quite all the way in. When you release the outcome as the condition for your effort, something loosens. The weight of what you cannot control becomes lighter because you stop trying to carry it. You are no longer trying to force a result into being. You are doing what is yours to do, as fully as you are able, and allowing the conditions to produce what they will produce. You are released from a responsibility that was never actually yours. The shore will be where it is. Your swimming is yours. These are two different things, and seeing them clearly as two different things is itself a kind of rest. Effort without attachment to outcome is not the same as not caring about the outcome. It is caring so completely about what you can actually do that the outcome stops being the measure of whether the effort was worth it. She brought him to shore. The sea goddess, having heard his answer, carried him across the remaining distance. He arrived on the coast of a country where a king had just died and left no heir. The people there saw a man coming out of the water, lean, salt-covered, 7 days in the ocean, and completely steady, and something in how he carried himself told them that what they had been waiting for had arrived. Mahosadha became their king. The story does not offer this rescue as a reward for the effort. It does not say, because he swam with the right attitude, the goddess was required to save him. The story says the conditions continued moving. They moved in a direction no one had predicted when the storm hit 14 days into the voyage. Mahosadha's 7 days was one condition. The death of that distant king was another. Their meeting, the man walking out of the sea and the kingdom that needed someone to walk in, no one planned it. It simply arose from what had already been set in motion. moving the way conditions move, not according to anyone's design, but according to what was already there. The shore was always there. He had not known where it was. He had only known what he could do. Mahosadha had something, a claim, a name, a direction he could call a reason, even when the reason was invisible. He was a prince. He had enough to explain the effort to anyone who asked. The next story belongs to someone who had nothing to work toward and found what all the people working hard around him could not. There is a verse that appeared on a monastery wall in China more than 1,000 years ago. A senior monk had written it in the night, carefully, and placed it where the master and the other monks would see it in the morning. The body is a Bodhi tree. The mind is like a bright mirror. Always keep it clean. Do not let the dust settle. The master read it. The monks read it. They agreed it showed understanding. It was copied, recited, praised throughout the monastery. Meanwhile, in the kitchen at the back, a man who could not read a single character was pounding rice. His name was Huineng. The verse had been written by Sheng Shu, the head monk, the most learned person in the monastery, the one who had given the most years to study. When the fifth patriarch, the master, Hongren, had announced that he would transmit the robe and the bowl to whoever demonstrated genuine understanding through a verse, everyone in the monastery knew it would be Sheng Shu. He was the obvious person. He had worked harder than anyone, understood the texts more deeply than anyone, sat longer, studied longer, and practiced with more dedication than any monk in that place. His verse describes something real. The mind does accumulate things, old reactions, habitual patterns, the residue of everything that has passed through it. Without attention, these settle and harden and begin to shape the way you see everything. Sheng Shu understood this. His practice was to stay watchful, to keep returning, to wipe the mirror clean each time the dust appeared. The verse expressed what he had practiced for years. It was careful, precise, and deeply sincere. The master read it and did not transmit the robe and the bowl. Huineng had come to the monastery not to study but to work. He had grown up poor, selling firewood to support his mother, with no schooling and no access to the texts. One day, he heard a line from a Buddhist teaching, someone reciting it in the street, and something in him opened. He did not know what it meant. He found his way to the monastery and told the master he wanted to understand. The master looked at him and said, "Go pound rice in the kitchen." He did not give Huineng a text to study. He did not seat him in the meditation hall. He sent him to the kitchen. Huineng went, and the days passed, and the months passed, and he pounded rice. He was not practicing in the way the other monks were practicing. He was just working. When he heard that a verse had appeared on the wall, he asked someone to read it to him. He listened. He stayed with it for a while. Then he asked to be taken to the wall, and he composed a response and asked someone to write it for him because he could not write. What he had to say was this: Bodhi has no tree. The mirror has no stand. From the very beginning, not one thing exists. Where would the dust settle? When the master saw this verse on the wall, he called the monks together. He told them publicly that it showed no understanding. He had it wiped away. That night, he went alone to the kitchen. He transmitted the robe and the bowl, the symbols of the lineage, the sign that one person's understanding had passed to the next, to Huineng, and he told him to leave before morning, before anyone woke. Huineng left in the dark. These two verses have been studied for over 1,000 years, not as historical curiosity, but as a living teaching, still asking something of the person who hears them. Sheng Shu's verse is not wrong. It describes something true. The mind does collect things. Thoughts that arrive and stay longer than they should. Reactions that calcify into habits. Patterns laid down long ago that still shape what you see today. Sheng Shu's practice was to tend to this, to keep returning to the present moment, to notice when the mind had drifted, to clean what had gathered. This is real, honest, sincere practice, and it is exhausting. Because the dust never stops coming. You wipe, and the mind gets dusty again. And underneath the wiping, always, a quiet anxiety. Am I doing this well enough? Is the mirror cleaner than it was? How much dust today compared to yesterday? The practice becomes a kind of maintenance work with no end, a war of attention against everything the mind produces. Huineng's verse points somewhere else entirely. He does not offer a better cleaning technique. He points at the assumption underneath Sheng Shu's practice and says, there is no mirror stand. There is no original surface that can be dirtied. From the very beginning, there has not been a single fixed thing that needs to be protected from dust. The word Bodhi means awakening. The Bodhi tree is the symbol of the place where the Buddha sat when understanding arrived. Huineng says, awakening has no particular location. It is not the product of a specific posture, a specific method, a specific set of conditions. It is not something produced at all. It is the nature of the mind before anything is produced. The mirror has no stand. The mind is not a possession you carry around and maintain. It is more like the sky. The sky does not collect dust. Clouds pass through. The sky does not become cloudy. It remains sky, before the clouds and during the clouds and after the clouds have moved on. From the very beginning, not one thing exists. This is not nihilism. It is not saying nothing matters. It is pointing to something in early Chan Buddhism, what later became Zen, that the Buddha's own teaching on the nature of mind already contained. The essential nature of the mind cannot be stained. Thoughts arise and pass. Reactions come and go. But underneath the arising and the passing, there is something that the dust cannot reach. It has never been in danger of being dirtied. It was never in need of cleaning. Where would the dust settle? Think about how much mental energy goes into what Sheng Shu's verse describes. The monitoring of your own mind, the watching for wrong thoughts, the noticing that you have just been angry or jealous or afraid, and the effort that follows to clear it away and return to some cleaner state. The measuring. Am I more peaceful than last month? Is the mirror cleaner? How did today's sit go compared to yesterday's? Most people who have tried to meditate know this experience. The self-monitoring, the quiet judgment that runs alongside the practice, assessing how well the practice is going, the exhausting loop of trying to have the right internal state and then feeling bad about not having it. The sense that if you could just get the mirror clean enough, if you could just sit still enough, if you could just let go enough, something would finally arrive. Hu Neng, pounding rice in the kitchen, was not doing any of this. He was not monitoring his mental state. He was not trying to achieve clarity. He was pounding rice because that was the work in front of him. His hands knew what to do. His mind was not divided between the task and the evaluation of the task. Just the weight of the pestle, the grain beneath it, the sound of the work. Nothing else was happening. And in that nothing else happening, what had always been there was simply present. Complete presence in ordinary work is not a lesser form of practice. It is what practice points toward. You may have touched this without knowing it had a name. A moment when the watching and the effort and the self-assessment all simply stopped. Not through discipline, through something else, through being so fully in what was happening. Washing a dish, walking to a car, listening to rain on a window, that the monitor went quiet, not because you made it quiet, because the moment was too complete to leave room for anything else. In those moments, the dust did not accumulate. The mirror was not dirty. There was nothing to clean because the cleaning mind was not running. And what was there instead was not a special state. It was just this moment, this task, this breath, this sound, ordinary and completely sufficient. This is what Hu Neng was living in the kitchen, not as a concept he understood, as what was actually present when he worked. When the fifth patriarch looked at Shengxiu's verse, he saw someone who understood the teaching and was practicing it sincerely. When he looked at Hu Neng's verse, he saw someone already living what the teaching was pointing toward. These are different things. Knowing about the path and being on the path are different things. Hu Neng had not studied the path. He had been on it, in the kitchen, without knowing it had a name. This teaching can feel uncomfortable for anyone who has worked hard at their practice. It can sound like, all your effort has been wasted. That is not what it says. What it says is more precise. Effort that comes from believing the mirror needs constant cleaning is effort spent against itself. The mind's essential nature does not need to be fixed. It needs to be recognized. And the recognition does not come through more effort. It comes when the effort to reach it is set down long enough to see what was always already there. Sitting down to meditate is not wrong. The practice is not wrong. What changes is what you think you are doing when you sit. You are not manufacturing stillness. You are not producing peace through effort. You are creating the conditions in which something that was always there can be noticed. Meditation is not the activity of cleaning the mind. It is the activity of stopping the cleaning long enough to see what is underneath it. And the stopping can happen anywhere. In a kitchen, in a moment of complete attention to something ordinary, in a breath taken fully, with nothing held back and nothing reached for, in the doing of any simple thing without the part of the mind that stands to the side, watching, measuring how it is going. The stories in this night have been pointing here from the beginning. Megya tried hard to meditate alone and couldn't, because effort without the right conditions cannot force what cannot be forced. Mahosadha did not fill his mind with grievance, and the mind that stayed empty could see. Mahajanaka gave everything to his effort and released the outcome, because the effort and the result have always been two different things. And Huineng, who was given nothing to work with and asked nothing of himself except to pound the rice, arrived at what all the studying and all the effort and all the careful mirror wiping could not reach. The harder you try to hold the stillness, the more it moves away from you. Let the hands do their work. Let the mind be the sky. The next story belongs to a being who had never encountered something his power could not move, until the night he came home to find one. He came home expecting his dwelling to be empty. It was not. Ahavaka was not the kind of being who encountered surprises. He was the kind of being who created them in others. For as long as anyone in the surrounding region could remember, his territory had been understood the way certain stretches of wilderness are understood, not as somewhere you go, but as somewhere you do not. He had an arrangement with the local king that had begun with criminals and had expanded. Over time, as such arrangements always expand, until it reached people who had done nothing at all except be available. A yaksha, in the understanding of that world, was not simply dangerous the way a wild animal is dangerous. A yaksha was dangerous the way a storm is dangerous, not because it chose you, but because you were in its path, and it made no distinctions. Avaka had lived this way for a long time. He had no reason to expect anything different from this night. But there was someone in his dwelling, a monk, sitting quietly in the dark, not fleeing, not apologizing, not startled, simply sitting. Ahavaka commanded him to leave. The monk stood, walked out, and stood quietly at the threshold. So Ajavaka commanded him to enter. The monk entered, returned to the same spot, resumed the same stillness, as if he had never moved at all. Leave. The monk left. Enter. The monk entered. Leave. Enter. 3 times, the monk complied without complaint or resistance, without any expression of what was asked costing him anything at all. Each time he returned, the stillness returned with him, unchanged, uninterrupted, as if the commands had passed through something that simply could not be disturbed. On the 4th command, "Go out, monk," the monk said quietly, "No, I will not go out. Do what you must do." There was no defiance in the voice, no provocation, just a plain statement, the way someone states a fact about the weather. And in that plainness, Ahavaka encountered for the first time something his power had no answer for. A presence that would not be moved, and was not even trying not to be moved. It simply had no interest in being moved. There was nothing in it that force could find purchase on. He reached for what he had. His greatest weapon was a disc of iron whose reputation had traveled through every region within reach of his name. He sent it across the space between them with full force. It arrived at the feet of the seated monk as gently as a leaf finding the ground. He released a storm, not weather but a storm of his making, the kind that strips bark from trees and drives grit through skin. It moved through the air and parted around the seated figure as if the stillness itself were redirecting it. The monk's robe did not stir. He sent floods of darkness, walls of fire, the most terrible forces he had ever summoned. Each one arrived, encountered the stillness, and lost its force. Not because the stillness blocked anything, because it did not resist. Force requires something to push against to do its damage. There was nothing here to push against. Avaka's greatest weapons crossed the space between them and arrived as nothing at all. He kept sending what he had because he had no other plan. This was what he had always done. Maximum force until the thing in front of him broke or fled. Every being he had ever encountered had either broken or fled. He had never once considered that a third possibility existed. The night moved forward. The attacks continued. The stillness did not change. And something began to shift inside Avaka. Not in his power, which was real and remained, but in his certainty. He had always known, somewhere below thought, that the world was something he could control if he brought enough force to bear on it. That knowing was unwinding now. Quietly, in the dark, without any announcement, the ground he had always stood on was becoming less solid under him. By the time the first light reached the edges of the sky, he had exhausted himself completely. Not his power, his certainty. He sat down, which he had not intended to do. He sat because he was tired in a way he had never been tired before. The tiredness that comes when you have tried everything you know how to try and discovered that none of it reached the thing you were trying to reach. In that tiredness, something surfaced that had been waiting below all the force for a very long time. A question. He asked it the way a person asks when they actually want to know. What is the best wealth a person can have? What brings true happiness? What is the sweetest thing a human being can taste? How does one live well? The monk answered him, faith is the best wealth. Wisdom brings the deepest happiness. Truth is the sweetest taste. A life lived with clarity and virtue is the life lived best. Avaka recognized the answers as true, not because they confirmed what he already believed, because they reached beneath what he believed, to something older and quieter inside him. He had been attacking truth all night. Truth had not moved, and now it was answering his real question, as if the whole long night had simply been a preparation for this moment, as if this was always where they were going to arrive. Had I left on my journey tonight and not returned, he said, I would have missed this. I would have gone on as I was, for a long time, and suffered for it. He had been about to depart when he came home to find the monk. The entire night had been, without him knowing it, the one interruption that changed the direction of his life. At dawn, The most feared being in the region became something the fear had been covering all along. The path opened the moment the effort stopped. What this long night holds for you is something specific. You cannot fight what will not fight back. Force is only as effective as the resistance it encounters. When there is nothing to push against, force travels through empty space and arrives nowhere. Ahavaka's weapons were real. His power was real. None of it was sufficient. Not because the monk was stronger, but because the monk had nothing in him that force could reach. The thoughts you fight in the night work the same way. The anxiety you try to argue down, the grief you try to outthink, the feeling you have been working to suppress for longer than you can remember, these do not weaken under force. They are fed by it. The harder you come at them, the more energy enters the space they occupy. They grow in proportion to the resistance they meet. The fight is what keeps them large. This is not a teaching about giving up. Ahavaka did not give up. He exhausted his approach, which is different. Giving up is stopping because you have decided the cause is lost. What Ahavaka reached was something else. The genuine end of the tools he had been relying on. The moment when the certainty that more force would eventually work had burned through completely, and what remained in its place was only honesty. What do I actually need to know? What is actually true? That question is available to you right now. You do not have to wait until dawn. You do not have to exhaust every weapon first. But if you have already done that, if you are already sitting in the tiredness on the other side of all the effort, then you are in exactly the right place. Not a place of failure, a place of readiness. The place where the question you have been avoiding becomes the one you are finally capable of sitting with. The Buddha waited through the whole night without resistance because he understood something Ahavaka did not yet know. The weapons would exhaust themselves. There was nothing to add to that process. Stillness was not a strategy he was deploying. It was simply what was present when there was nothing to prove and nothing to defend. And in the presence of that kind of stillness, force eventually sits down. Force eventually asks a real question. Force eventually discovers that what it has been searching for was never going to be found through force at all. The weapons are on the ground. The storm has passed. The stillness that could not be destroyed is still here, as it has been here all along. And in the quiet that remains, there is a question already rising from somewhere below all the effort. Let it come. The next story belongs to a king whose struggle was smaller and closer to home. Not a demon with iron weapons, but a bowl at the table and a verse he was asked to hold before the first bite. He arrived out of breath. The king of Kosala, a man with armies and treasury and the power to summon any person in his kingdom with a word, arrived at the Buddha's dwelling out of breath and asked to sit down before he said anything. The Buddha gestured to a seat. The king lowered himself into it heavily, slowly, with the careful deliberateness of a very large person managing a very tired body. King Pasenadi of Kosala was one of the Buddha's oldest students. Not in age, but in duration. He had been coming to sit with the Buddha for years. He was a sincere man, genuinely interested in the teaching, generous to the monks, trying in his own way to live a good life. He also ate too much. He had always eaten too much. And with time, the eating had made everything harder. Movement, sleep, thinking clearly, feeling well in his own body. The difficulty with a habit like this is rarely that you do not know it is a problem. The king knew. He had known for years. He had tried, in the way people try, to eat less. He had told himself he would eat less at the next meal. He had asked his cooks to prepare smaller portions. He had thought about it at length, and the thinking had not reached the part of him where the eating happened. At every meal, something occurred between his intention and his action that the intention lost. He would sit down, meaning to eat less. The food would arrive. The smell of it, the warmth of it, the pleasure of the first bite, and then time would pass. And at the end of the meal, he would realize he had eaten everything in front of him again. Not because he had chosen to, because the choosing had not been there at the moment it was needed. This is not weakness. This is how habits work. A habit is a behavior that has been repeated so many times that it no longer needs a decision to run. The choosing happened once, or 100 times, and then the pattern was laid down, and after that, the pattern simply ran. The king was not choosing to overeat. He was not even quite eating in the way that a conscious person eats. Something was eating, and he was there, watching. He sat down in front of the Buddha, and the tiredness in his body was visible. Not just the tiredness of the walk, the older tiredness, the kind that settles into a person who has been carrying something for a long time and cannot figure out how to put it down. The Buddha did not say, "You should eat less." He did not explain the harm of overeating. He did not offer a list of practices to follow or disciplines to adopt. He did not speak about willpower or character or what a man in the king's position ought to be able to manage. He offered the king a verse. When a person is always mindful, knows moderation in eating, all their sufferings are diminished. Aging comes slowly. 4 lines. The kind of verse that sounds simple enough that a person might feel they had already understood it. Then the Buddha gave one specific instruction. "Have someone recite this verse to you at every meal," he said. "Before you eat, every time." The king went home and did it. He found a young man to recite the verse, and at every meal, before the first bite, before the food was even touched, the 4 lines were read aloud. Then the meal began. At first, nothing changed except that there were 4 lines before the meal started. The king ate the same way. The food arrived, the verse was recited, the food disappeared. He did not feel more restrained. The verse was just a verse. But something was moving underneath the noticing, slowly, over days and then weeks. Something in the practice of hearing those words before eating was introducing a small gap into a process that had never had one. A breath, a pause, a moment that existed between sitting down and reaching for the food. The verse was not changing the king's appetite. It was doing something more precise. It was inserting a moment of awareness into a process that had previously had none. Think about how small that sounds. 4 lines of verse before a meal. A few seconds of attention. And yet those few seconds were what years of intention had not provided. They were the gap. The breath between the condition and the response. Early Buddhist teaching on mindfulness points exactly to this. Not a special mental state, not an altered experience, but the simple act of noticing what is present before reacting to it. The verse was doing this work, quietly, 1 meal at a time. In that gap, something small began to shift. Not dramatically, not through resolution, just a little less, then a little less again. The body's relationship with the meal was changing, not because the king had decided to change it, but because something had been placed between the impulse and the action. After some time, the king came back to the Buddha. He was lighter. He moved differently. He sat down without the same heaviness. He told the Buddha, "The verse has cured me." The Buddha smiled. What the verse cured is worth staying with. The king did not need more information. He already knew that overeating was doing him harm. He had known for years. Information was not what was missing. What was missing was something much smaller and much harder to provide. A gap, a space, a small interruption between the moment the food appeared and the moment the eating began. Without that gap, the behavior was automatic. It ran below the level of choosing. The king could genuinely intend to eat less and still find at the end of each meal that the intention had made no difference, because the intention was never present at the moment it was needed. The moment it was needed was the first bite, the second, the third, and at those moments, the intention was gone and the habit was running. The verse interrupted the habit. Not by being persuasive, not by containing wisdom the king did not already have, by existing as a pause. 4 lines of verse before every meal created what all the king's intentions had failed to create, the space in which choosing was possible. When you are inside a habit, you do not feel like you are choosing. You feel like you are being moved. Something begins and you follow it, and somewhere in the following the decision was already made and you were not asked. The question this story raises is, where is the place to intervene? Not in the middle of the meal, when the food is already being eaten. Not before the meal, in an abstract commitment that dissolves on contact with the actual situation. At the threshold. At the moment between sitting down and beginning, that is where the verse lived. This is what mindfulness means in practice. Not a state of calm, not an achievement. Mindfulness is the moment of noticing that exists between impulse and action. The moment you see what you are about to do before you have already done it. It is very brief. And it is where every choice actually lives. When the gap is not there, there is no choice. There is just behavior. Afterward, you may feel regret or confusion about how it happened again. But the moment for a different choice was never available, or was available for too short a time to be used. When the gap is there, even a small one, even just 4 lines of verse, something becomes possible that was not possible before. You arrive at the threshold awake. And at the threshold, awake, the choice is genuinely yours. Most of the pain around difficult habits comes from meeting them in the middle. after the behavior is already in motion, when stopping it requires a kind of effort that is very hard to sustain. The verse moved the meeting point. Instead of encountering the eating mid-meal, the king was beginning to encounter it at the edge, in the small, clear space before it began. At the edge, the effort is much smaller. A quiet word can do what a shout in the middle cannot. The Buddha did not give the king willpower. He gave the king a pause. And the pause, over time, gave the king back to himself. You may recognize this from somewhere in your own life. There is something you do that you do not want to do. Maybe it is eating the way the king ate. Maybe it is reaching for a phone at the moment a difficult feeling arrives. Maybe it is the sharp word that comes out before you have chosen it in a conversation that mattered. Maybe it is the way the first hour of the morning goes before you have decided how you want it to go. The drink, the scroll, the avoidance of something that has been waiting for your attention. You know it is happening. You have known for a while, and knowing has not been enough to stop it. The problem is not that you lack information. The problem is that at the moment the behavior begins, you are not there. The habit is running, and you arrive a few seconds later and find it already in motion. The moment that needed your presence came and went while your presence was somewhere else. This is the ordinary experience of anyone who has tried to change something through willpower alone. The willpower arrives after the fact. Standing in the kitchen looking at the empty plate, wondering how that happened. Or picking up the phone 3 minutes into a scroll, remembering you had decided not to do this. The decision was real. The desire to change was real. But the decision and the desire were not at the threshold when the threshold arrived. What would it mean to have a verse? Not the words specifically, but something, anything, that creates a pause before the behavior begins. A single breath taken consciously before the phone is picked up. One moment of stillness before the conversation that always goes the same way. A pause, just long enough to notice what you are about to do and feel whether it is what you want to choose. The pause is not a discipline. It is not willpower. It is just returning to yourself for long enough to be present at the moment a choice is being made. The choice may still go the same way. Sometimes it does, but it goes there as a choice, not as a habit running without a driver. This is what the Buddha gave the king, wrapped in 4 lines. Not a cure for appetite, a moment of presence, and the moment of presence was enough. The teaching is not about food. It is about the 100 small thresholds in any ordinary day, the moments in which a habit is either noticed or not noticed, chosen or merely repeated. The practice does not live in a special state or after years of preparation. It lives at the table, before the first bite, in the few seconds that bring you back to where you are. Every day has a table. Every day has a threshold where a habit is waiting to run. The verse does not need to be 4 lines. It just needs to be enough to bring you there awake. The next story belongs to someone for whom even 1 verse was too many. A monk who could not memorize a single line no matter how many months he tried. His own brother had him removed from the monastery. He sat outside the gate in the dust and wept, and the Buddha came to him there. Not with a teaching, not with explanation, but with a piece of white cloth and an instruction so small it seemed like nothing at all. "I don't hate her," he said to his parents. "I want to go." They pressed him. They asked what she had done wrong, what had upset him, what he needed from her that she wasn't providing. He couldn't say. He had no grievance to name, no injury to report, no behavior that had crossed a line. He said she was good. He said she was kind. He said he simply could not stay, and so he left. This was her first marriage. She had been in it for 1 month. Isidazi came from a good family in the city of Ujjaini. She had been raised with care, taught how to keep a household, how to treat the people in it with genuine respect, how to give without keeping account of what was given. She was not performing goodness. That is important to understand about her. She was not calculating how to appear to the people around her. It was simply how she moved through the world. Her father had chosen a worthy husband, a man from a respected family, and on the day of the wedding he felt he had done right by his daughter. In the first month, Isidasi woke before her husband every morning. She washed his feet. She set out his sandals. She prepared his food and brought it to him without being asked. She cared for his parents as if they were her own, treated his mother the way you treat your own mother, his father with the same deference. When guests came to the house, she saw to their comfort before they thought to ask. She kept the household clean and in order. She did not complain. She was not waiting to be thanked. She was not performing any of it for recognition, not building towards some reward she expected in return. She was doing what she believed a person of her position should do, because she genuinely believed in doing it. After a month, her husband went to his parents. He told them he wanted to leave. His parents were bewildered. They asked what she had said to him. He said she had said nothing wrong. They asked if she had failed some duty. He said she had not. They told him she was good and virtuous and that he should stay. He said he could not. He had tried to explain the feeling, and the feeling had no words that he could find. He wanted to go. He went. Isidasi returned to her father's house. Her father loved her and did not want to see her undone by one failure. He found another household, another man of good standing, and gave his daughter another chance at the life he had hoped for her. The second marriage lasted 1 week. The second husband said the same things as the first. Not a rehearsed repetition, not the same words. Just the same essential absence of a reason. He had nothing against her. He wanted to leave. He left. Her father tried once more. A wandering ascetic was passing through the city. A man who had given up the householder's life, who carried little, needed little, had chosen simplicity over accumulation. Her father offered Isidasi to him as a companion on his path. The ascetic agreed. Perhaps her father believed that a man who had already left the ordinary world would respond differently, that whatever kept driving the others away would have no power over someone who had already renounced so much. Perhaps he thought a different kind of person would produce a different outcome. It didn't. The ascetic left too. He did not just leave Isidasi. He abandoned his wandering life entirely, returned to ordinary household living, finding the regular world more bearable than her company. He could not explain it either. There was no cruelty in any of these men. None of them wanted to harm her. None of them could produce specific accusations. The leaving simply happened 3 times, in the same pattern, without any explanation she could use. There is a particular kind of suffering that is harder than ordinary suffering. Ordinary suffering has a visible cause. Something went wrong and you can name what it was. You were not careful enough or patient enough. You take the reason and you work on it and you come back with more care the next time. Even failure can be turned into a lesson if the failure has a face. There is a way forward, even when the way is difficult. Isidasi faced something without a face. She had been careful. She had been patient to a degree that most people are not asked to be. She had given everything that a person in her position was expected to give, and more than that, by every measure available to her, she had done what was asked. And it had failed 3 times, in exactly the same way, leaving her with nothing to correct. The question that remained, the one that effort could not answer, was, what is wrong with me? This is one of the heaviest things a person can carry. It is heavier than ordinary grief, because grief has an object, something lost, someone gone. But the question, what is wrong with me, has no object. It turns inward and it feeds on itself. Every attempt becomes a test of whether the defect is still there. Every failure confirms that it is. The harder you try to disprove it, the more evidence it gathers. It is a question that is not resolved through effort. It is sustained by effort. The trying keeps it alive. Isidasi went to her father and asked to ordain. She was not collapsing under the question. She was asking for a different relationship with it, not answering it, not fighting it, but setting it down long enough to sit. Her father agreed. She was ordained. She began to practice. The practice was ordinary, no special instruction that promised quick results. No method that would extract the explanation she had been searching for. Just sitting, returning to awareness when the mind wandered, returning to the breath, returning to what was present without pushing it away or pulling it toward her. Day after day, week after week, the consistency was not urgent. She did not sit with strain in her body or desperate intention behind her eyes. She sat the way a tide fills a shoreline, steadily, not trying to arrive anywhere specific, just moving in the direction of the practice and letting the practice be what it was. Then, in deep stillness, something became visible that ordinary movement had kept covered. The clarity that arrived was different from memory or imagination. It was what the mind sees when it finally stops moving long enough to see what it has been obscuring. She saw into a previous lifetime. She saw herself as a young man, born into a comfortable household, handsome and sought after. She saw how that person had lived, moving from one woman to another, accepting care and devotion, and then leaving when the warmth faded, not with deliberate cruelty, simply without thought for what the leaving cost the people it was done to. She saw the women who had been left. She saw what it felt like from where they stood. She saw the seeds of action traveling forward through lifetimes, the the way a stone thrown into water creates circles that move outward long after the stone has sunk. Early Buddhist teaching understands action this way, not as a moral ledger kept by an external judge, but as consequence following cause the way a shadow follows a body. What she had done in that past life had created a particular shape, and that shape had moved forward. It had manifested as men who could not name their reason for leaving, because the reason did not belong to this lifetime. It belonged to seeds planted long before. The circle had run its course. There was nothing more to answer for. The question, "What is wrong with me?" had rested on a false premise. There was no permanent defect. There was a cause, a consequence, and an end. She understood this. The understanding arrived the way direct seeing works, where release from an old idea arrives, not as a new conclusion you have argued yourself into, but as the sudden lightening when something you have been carrying is finally set down. The question dissolved. It dissolved when she saw it had been built on a wrong assumption, that somewhere at the center of her was something broken and structural, some permanent wrongness that explained everything. There was no such thing. There was cause and consequence, which are not the same as blame. She continued to sit, through patient, steady practice, the kind that is not angling toward a specific outcome. She went deeper than the past life understanding. She released what had outlasted the marriages, the wish for things to have gone differently, the grip of the story about who she was and why she had failed. She attained full liberation. The teaching in Isidasi's story is not about past lives. The past life vision was the specific form that clarity took for her in her time and tradition. The teaching underneath is about where effort reaches its limit and what becomes available when effort is finally allowed to rest. There are situations where trying cannot find the cause of the problem because the cause is not where the trying is directed. You can work very hard at the surface of a thing, the behavior, the visible layer, and what is moving beneath the surface is untouched by all of it. Isidasi's service was complete. Her effort was real, and it could not reach what was actually moving through those marriages. The trying was not the wrong choice in some obvious way. It simply was not the tool the situation required, and more of it would not have made it the right tool. This is not a comfortable teaching. It says, sometimes your most sincere effort is genuinely your most sincere effort, and it still cannot reach what needs to be reached. Some things move at a level that effort cannot access. What reaches those things is patient attention, the willingness to stop moving and let what is true surface on its own. You may know this territory. There is something you have been trying to fix or change or understand, and the trying has not reached it. Maybe it is a pattern in your life that reappears regardless of how carefully you approach it, regardless of how much awareness you bring. Maybe it is the voice that rises after a certain kind of failure, a voice older than any recent event that sounds like truth because you have never been still enough to question it. Maybe it is the thing you keep returning to that you do not want to return to, and resolution and self-examination have not changed it. Maybe it is the question itself. What is wrong with me? Why does this keep happening? Why am I like this? The harder you push at it from the surface, the heavier it becomes. Each failed attempt adds weight. Each explanation that doesn't quite fit makes the question more insistent. The effort does not reach down to where the question lives. It just confirms that the question is still there. Isidasi did not find freedom by answering the question. She found freedom by sitting patiently enough, steadily enough, without forcing anything, that what was true became visible on its own. The question that effort could not resolve, stillness finally released. She served them perfectly. They still left. And through patient, unhurried sitting, the practice that does not grip the outcome, she found what the serving and the leaving and all the years of trying had not been able to provide. She found it in the ordinary quiet of returning to practice, without strain, without urgency, without needing it to arrive by a particular morning. One morning, a man woke at the very bottom of the world, at the place society leaves the people it does not want to see. He swept what others discarded, and he kept his eyes low because people in his position did not raise their eyes. On that morning, someone was walking down the road toward him. He saw the figure before he understood what he was seeing. The clothes were different, not the robes of a merchant or a city official, but the saffron of a wandering teacher, and the figure was walking toward him, not past him, toward him. Sunita's body moved before his mind did. It knew what to do. The reflex practiced since childhood, since before he had words for what he was. Step aside, give the road, lower the eyes. Make yourself smaller than you already feel, because someone is coming and the road does not belong to people like you. He stepped off the road. He turned away. He held his broom the way you hold the thing that marks you, because it always does. The figure kept walking toward him. Sunita had been born into the Chandala caste, the lowest position in the social order of that time and place. His people did the work that other castes would not touch, handling the dead, cleaning the streets, carrying away what respectable households left behind. The word for what he was carried more than a description of work. It carried a verdict. The caste system of that world was not only an economic arrangement, it presented itself as a description of reality itself, of what a person was at the level of their being, what they deserved, what the order of things had allocated to them. Sunita had been allocated the bottom. He had grown up understanding this. He had absorbed the postures that went with it, how to walk at the very edge of the road, how to announce himself when he entered a street so that people could move away, how to make his presence as small as possible. He was good at his work. The streets were swept. No one thought to look at who was sweeping them. A life shaped entirely by other people's certainty about what you are leaves a particular mark. It is not just the external facts, where you walk, what you carry, who steps around you. It is the way the certainty enters. When everyone around you agrees on what you are, when the agreement is so universal and so old that it precedes your own birth, the category stops feeling like an opinion anyone holds about you. It starts to feel like the ground you stand on. It starts to feel like what is simply true. The figure walking toward him was the Buddha. The Buddha had seen Sunita, and the Buddha had stopped. This requires a moment of attention. The Buddha was surrounded most of the time by people of standing: monks, wealthy lay followers, merchants and nobles and scholars who came seeking, teaching, or seeking his company. A Chandala stepping off the road as he passed would have been invisible to many people in that position. Not through cruelty, simply because the categories of that world were powerful enough that certain people did not register as people who needed to be noticed. The Buddha noticed him, stopped, turned toward him, walked to where he was standing with his eyes down at the edge of the road, and said, "Come here, friend." 2 words worth sitting with. Friend, used directly as an address, as an invitation from one person to another person whose company is wanted. Not Chandala, not sweeper, not the word that names your caste before it names you as anything else. Friend, the word that says, "Your presence here has value to me." Sunita did not have a way to respond to this. Nothing in his life had prepared him for it. He had learned what he was from every person who had ever walked past him on every road he had ever swept. He had learned it through absence, the way a crowd clears itself when someone like him is working, the breath held, the eyes that move through him rather than to him. He had learned it through silence. The silence of a world that agrees on something so completely it doesn't need to say it aloud anymore. And the man standing in front of him now was someone whose students included kings. And he was using the word friend. Sunita came forward. The Buddha taught him. He taught him about the nature of suffering, how it arises, what conditions keep it in place, and what the path out of it looks like. The teaching he received was the same teaching given to the men from noble families who came seeking the Dhamma. It was the same teaching given to merchants and scholars. It was not simplified or adjusted to account for where Sunita had started. It was offered as it was, fully, because the mind receiving it was capable of receiving it. As capable as any other mind, born with the same essential nature, available to the same liberation. Sunita received the teaching and he practiced. He had no monastery, no community of scholars to sit with, no store of past learning to draw on. He had his broom and his road and the teaching that had been offered to him as if he mattered. He practiced with the consistency of someone who has spent an entire life showing up to work that no one else would claim. He returned to the practice the way he returned to the street each morning, without drama, without expectation, because returning was what you did. Through patient, quiet sitting, he attained full liberation. The liberation that had been declared structurally impossible for someone of his birth. It was, in fact, completely available. Afterward, the Buddha said to those around him, "It is not birth that makes a person an outcast. It is not birth that makes a person worthy of respect. A person is not determined by the family they came from, the caste the world assigned them, the category applied to them before they had a chance to question it. What a person is shown through their actions, their wisdom, the care they bring to how they live. These things are available to anyone. They do not require a particular birth." In a separate teaching, the Buddha offered an image for what a human life is. "Imagine the great ocean," he said, "not a bay or a harbour. The whole of it, its full depth and breadth, with no shore visible from its centre. Somewhere in that ocean lives a blind turtle. the turtle surfaces once every 100 years. One moment of rising, once in a century, from whatever depth it inhabits to the open air above, and floating somewhere on the surface of that ocean, moving with the current, carried wherever the water takes it, is a wooden yoke with a hole in it, a small ring, drifting with the waves. How likely is it, the Buddha asked, that when the turtle surfaces, its head passes through the hole in the yoke? His students said, "It is almost impossible to imagine. The ocean is too vast, the surfacing too rare, the yoke too small and too randomly placed for the timing to ever be right." The Buddha said, "A human life is rarer than that." He was not trying to manufacture gratitude in the people listening. He was pointing at something they had stopped being able to see. A human life, this specific combination of awareness and capacity, and the ability to recognize suffering and to move in the direction of its end, is not the default state of existence. It is not where all things eventually arrive. It is the rare coincidence of conditions that makes the path possible at all. And Sunita had it. The man with the broom at the bottom of the road had it, as completely and as fully as anyone who had ever sat in a palace or a great monastery or been born into a family that the world considered worthy of notice. This is what the story of Sunita is about. The seeing. What the Buddha saw when he stopped on the road was already there. The world around Sunita had simply agreed, for centuries before his birth, not to look. The system that had assigned Sunita his position was very certain about him. It had decided his worth before he was born on the basis of the body he arrived in, and it communicated that decision to him every day of his life through 100 different signals. The way people moved when he approached, the way a road would clear itself, the way his presence was managed rather than acknowledged. The certainty was so complete and so unanimous that it would have been almost impossible not to absorb it. The world was so sure. And the world was completely wrong. You are hearing this in a body that has been categorized. Maybe the categorization was direct. A caste, a diagnosis, a role someone assigned you in a family or a workplace that decided what you were before you had discovered it yourself. Maybe it arrived through smaller, repeated signals. The achievements that were met with surprise because they were not expected from someone like you. The ideas you offered that were taken up only when someone else repeated them. The rooms where your presence needed to be explained or justified in a way that other people's presence did not. Maybe it came from a specific person early in your life, when you were still deciding what to believe about yourself, and what they said settled in before you had the language to question it. Categories that are assigned with enough certainty do not arrive feeling like opinions. They arrive feeling like facts. They arrive the way the caste system arrived for Sunita. Consistent, old, confirmed by everyone he encountered, never contradicted by anyone whose voice might have counted. When something is agreed upon that completely, it stops feeling like a description someone chose. It starts feeling like the truth of what you are. And once it feels like the truth of what you are, the question of whether it is accurate stops arising. Why question what is simply how things are? but the category and the person inside it are not the same thing. The category is what a set of minds decided about a set of conditions. The person inside the category is a human life. The turtle's head through the ring, rare and complete and fully capable of what any other human life is capable of. The world's certainty about what Sunita was did not determine what Sunita was. It determined how the world treated him. Those are entirely different things. What has been certain about you? What old verdict carries weight still? The voice that says you are the kind of person who cannot do a thing, or does not deserve a thing, or should not expect a thing. What did someone decide about you with enough repetition and enough authority that it began to feel like a fact about the world rather than a judgment about you? The teaching is not, reject the categories and feel good about yourself. The teaching is older and quieter than that. It is this: what the categories describe is never the whole of what is there. They were never accurate enough to reach the thing that the Buddha saw in Sunita on the road. The human life, the turtle's head through the ring, the rare and complete availability of the path. No system of categories has ever been precise enough to see that. And that is exactly where the path begins. Sunita came forward when someone called him friend. He came forward, and from exactly where he stood, the path was open. The next story belongs to a king who found, at the moment he gave the one thing he was most certain he could not give, that the giving was the very thing he had been searching for. Every day, the hunters came. Not quietly. The king of Benares loved the hunt the way some men love noise. The sensation of speed and power and a large, terrified space moving away from you in all directions. He would come with his court and his weapons and his dogs, and the forest would empty itself in front of him. Deer running in every direction. The crack of branches, the sound of panic moving through the trees the way water moves, everything giving way at once, each animal's flight feeding the next one's. Many deer were injured in those runs. Many were caught. Many simply died from the terror of it, the way creatures can die when fear runs through them long enough with nowhere to go. The herd lived in the permanent condition of almost fleeing, bodies always ready, ears always forward, the quiet of the forest never quite real because the hunters would come again tomorrow. There were two herds in that forest. One was led by a deer the stories call the Bodhisattva. The golden deer, his coat the color of hammered metal, his bearing different from the others, the way still water is different from moving water. He watched his herd run. He watched the injuries. He watched what a life lived entirely in the body's alarm state does to a creature over time. And he decided to do something that looked, to anyone who did not understand it, like surrender. He went to the king's palace and requested an audience. The king, who had never been approached by the thing he hunted, received him in astonishment. The golden deer proposed an arrangement. Each day, one deer would come to the royal garden voluntarily, to be killed. One from his herd on certain days, one from the other herd on the rest. In exchange, the daily hunt, the pursuit, the panic, the running down of animals through the trees would stop. The king would have his deer. The herd would have something they had never had before. Ordinary days. Days in which the sound at the edge of the forest was only wind. The king agreed. Both herds began to keep their end of it. The forest learned a new kind of quiet. Some time passed this way, and then came the morning when the turn fell on the second herd, the one led by a deer called Saka, and the deer chosen for that day was a doe who was heavily pregnant. She was close to her time. Her body carried a life that had not yet opened its eyes on the world. She went first to Saka and asked to be excused until after she gave birth. She was not asking to escape the arrangement. She was not asking to be spared. She was asking for her fawn, for the life inside her that had not yet had a morning. "Let me give birth first," she said, "and after that I will go." Saka refused. The arrangement was the arrangement. It was not his herd's turn, and he was not willing to send someone from his own in her place. The obligation was hers to carry. She went then to the golden deer. She made the same request. She stood before him in the early morning light, her body visibly near its time, asking for one more day, just one more day, for the fawn. The golden deer looked at her. He saw what the situation contained. He understood the arrangement and whose turn it was and what the rules required. He also understood what sending her today would mean. 2 deaths, not one. A life that had never breathed, taken with one that had never caused harm. He told her to go back to her herd. He would go to the king's garden today, in her place, though it was not his turn, though no obligation required it of him, though there was no rule that could be pointed to that said this was his to do. He walked to the garden in the morning. He walked the way someone walks who has made a decision they are entirely at peace with, not slowly, not dragging, but with the steadiness that comes when the inner debate is over and the action is simply what the moment asks for. He did not run. He had spent months helping his herd not to run, and now, walking toward the thing that running had always been away from, he discovered that the not running was also available to him. He walked through the gate. He lay down. He waited. When the king's men saw who was in the garden, they went to the king. They said, "It is the golden deer." The king came. He recognized the creature who had walked to his palace months before with the proposal, the one whose arrangement had given the forest its quiet, the one whose presence in the herd was different from the others in a way the king had noticed without being able to name. He asked, "Why are you here? It is not your turn." The golden deer explained. The pregnant doe, her request, the fawn not yet born, the 2 lives that sending her would have taken. He had not been able to let that happen while he had the capacity to prevent it. So he had come. The king was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "Who taught you this?" The golden deer said, "The Dhamma." Not a teacher, not a lineage or a formal school. The Dhamma, the truth of how things actually are, the recognition of suffering, the recognition that a life not yet born has weight, the recognition that you have, in this moment, the capacity to act from what you see. When you see clearly enough, you do not need instruction. The seeing itself tells you what to do. The teaching was not the instruction, but the seeing. The king told his men to put down their weapons. He granted his protection first to the golden deer king, then to the pregnant doe, then to the golden herd, then to the other herd, then to all deer living under the protection of the kingdom, then to all creatures. The circle kept widening, the way the golden deer's compassion had widened from one doe to a whole forest. Not planned, not calculated, but moving the way understanding moves when it is genuine, outward, without stopping, until it reaches what it reaches. The golden deer had walked into the garden to die. He had made no request for mercy. He had arranged for no outcome except the one the arrangement required. He had simply done what the situation called for, clearly and without hesitation. And something about that clarity, something about witnessing a creature who had every reason to run and had chosen not to, moved through the king and changed him. Not the strategy of it, the quality of it, the absolute absence of flight. This is the teaching at the center of this story. The golden deer's stillness produced the outcome that no amount of running had ever produced. The herd had run every day. The running had not saved them. The arrangement they had made to minimize harm had not finally protected them. What changed everything was one being choosing, once, to stand completely present in the face of what was coming, to walk toward it rather than away from it, to be fully there without the distortion that panic generates. The story is not asking you to be a golden deer. It is not asking you to offer your life for something. It is asking something smaller and harder. Whether you can stay present with what is actually approaching rather than with the shape that fleeing has given it. There is something in your life that has the quality of a thing being fled from. Maybe it is visible, a difficulty that has been building at the edge of your attention, something you have been keeping peripheral so it doesn't have to be central. Maybe it is subtler, a conversation that keeps being deferred, a truth you have been managing around rather than looking at directly, a feeling you have become practiced at outrunning before it fully arrives. Maybe it is the question about your own life that you know is waiting, but that you have learned to keep busy enough not to hear. The instinct to run is not wrong. The whole forest was running. Everything in every deer's body was oriented toward a way. Running when something threatens is the oldest instruction a body carries, and in many situations it is exactly right. The deer of the forest were not foolish for running, but the running did not protect them. The hunt kept coming. The terror kept being the permanent weather of the forest. The effort to stay ahead of what was pursuing them kept producing exactly the conditions it was trying to escape. The harder they ran, the more the running itself became the shape of their lives. The golden deer's stillness was not the suppression of fear through force of will. It was something different. The clarity that becomes available when you are not using all of your attention to manage distance between yourself and what is coming. He had found, through genuine stillness, that the thing the forest had been running from had a specific face, and the face, looked at directly, did not require fleeing. It required something much simpler, walking toward it, being present with what was actually there, rather than with the version of it that panic generates. The thing you have been running from is rarely exactly as large as the running has made it feel. Running generates its own terror. not looking as its own kind of suffering. The harder you work to keep something at bay, the more energy it demands, and the more certain you become that it must be kept at bay. The effort does not reduce the thing. It keeps it exactly the size that justifies the running. The golden deer walked toward the gate. He lay down and waited. He did not know what would happen next. He had done what the moment asked, and he was there, fully present, without the distortion that comes from trying not to be. The Dhamma had not told him what the outcome would be. It had shown him what the moment contained, and he had acted from what he saw. "Who taught you this?" the king asked. And the answer points at something that cannot be transferred from one person to another, cannot be given as instruction, cannot be received as information. It is what becomes available when the running stops, not as a reward for stopping, simply because the clarity was always there and the running had been covering it. When you are still enough to see what is actually in front of you, the action that the moment requires often becomes apparent without deliberation. The golden deer did not reason his way to going in the doe's place. He saw her standing there and he understood what she was carrying, and he went. The seeing and the acting were almost the same movement. That is what the Dhamma is. Not a code imposed from outside, but what becomes visible when you are quiet enough to look. The last story belongs to a child who was left at the very beginning of his life in the place where the dead are kept, and who found, from exactly that place, what most people spend entire lifetimes searching for. The man stopped walking. He let go of the child's hand, and then his footsteps moved away through the dark, and after a while there was nothing left of them. The child stood alone at the edge of the charnel ground. He was very young. He had been led here at night, because what cannot be done in the light sometimes gets done in the dark. The charnel ground was where the dead were brought, not to a grave, but to the open air, to return to the earth in the way that things return when no one has the means to do it more carefully. It was the place at the edge of the human world. Respectable people did not approach it after dark. The child was standing inside it now, with nothing. Sopaka had been born into circumstances that the world of his time had no language for improving. Below the lowest caste, a mother who was gone, a stepfather who had decided, without drama and without explanation, that the child was not worth the continuation of. What he had done by bringing Sopaka to the charnel ground and releasing his hand was not cruelty in the way cruelty usually announces itself. It was quieter than that. A decision made and carried out, with no audience, no ceremony, no acknowledgement that what was being decided mattered to anyone. The charnel ground would do what needed to be done. He would not have to watch. This is how a verdict looks when it requires no court, no accusation, no sentence spoken aloud, no process of any kind, just a hand released in the dark and the child remaining where he stood. The charnel ground in the ancient world was not simply a place of death. It was a threshold, a place understood to exist at the edge between the world the living claimed and the world that belonged to nothing at all. Certain meditators went there deliberately, to sit among the evidence of impermanence, to let the body's eventual dissolution become undeniable and immediate rather than abstract. It was also where those expelled from ordinary life sometimes gathered at the absolute margin, people for whom no other space remained. Sopaka had not chosen to be there. He had been placed there by the man who was supposed to protect him. He was standing at the furthest edge of everything the human world offers. The Buddha was walking that night. He walked through charnel grounds when he walked at night. Not to teach, not to be seen doing something noteworthy, but because these were the places where the reality of impermanence was most immediately present, and presence was what he valued. He was not hurrying. He walked the way a person walks, who is fully where they are, not somewhere else in their mind. He came to where the child stood. He stopped. He looked at Sopaka, and he saw what no one in Sopaka's life had thought to look for: a human life, the capacity for understanding that the Buddha had recognized in scholars and monks and kings, present, intact, fully available in the child, alone, in the dark, at the edge of the charnel ground. The circumstances had been the worst that circumstances know how to produce. The capacity within those circumstances was untouched by any of it. The Buddha sat down beside him. He sat the same way he sat in conversations with kings and grieving mothers and students who came armed with years of learning. He brought the same quality of presence to the child in the charnel ground that he brought everywhere. And then he taught him. The teaching was not simplified for the child's age. It was the understanding he offered to anyone who came to him. The nature of suffering, what keeps it in motion, what the path toward its end looks like. He did not first address the charnel ground or the stepfather or what had been decided about this child's life. He simply taught, as if teaching this child was the most natural thing in the world, which, for him, it was. Sopaka received the teaching. He practiced with the single-mindedness of someone who has been given something in a place where everything else has been taken. When very little remains to cling to, the practice sometimes finds a clarity that comfort makes harder to reach. He returned to the teaching again and again. He was very young. He attained full liberation. What the practice revealed to him from inside those circumstances was something that could not have been received as a statement and simply believed. It had to be seen directly, and what he saw was this. The hand released in the dark had been a verdict about his life. The charnel ground had been a verdict about his life. The caste he was born into, the complete absence of anyone who expected anything of him. These were verdicts, rendered without ceremony, agreed upon by everyone who had known of him, and none of it had any power over what his mind was capable of. The verdicts had determined what his life looked like from the outside. They had not reached what was available from the inside. Those are not the same thing. They never were. No doctrine had handed him this as reassurance. He had arrived at it through practice, through the patient, unforced returning to awareness that sits at the heart of the path. The path had opened from the charnel ground, from the worst possible place, from the place where everything had been decided against him, and it had opened completely. This is the last story, and it is also the answer to all of them. 10 lives have been offered tonight, each carrying a different face of the same teaching. The monk who could not find peace by searching for it. The minister who kept his mind free when everything was taken from him. The man swimming in an ocean with no shore in sight, who kept swimming because the effort itself was his, even if the shore was not. The man who could not read but understood what scholars had missed, who found the whole of the teaching in an ordinary morning's work. The killer the world had finished with, who discovered that what the world decides is never the final word. The king who needed only a verse before each meal to give himself back to himself. The woman who tried everything and found freedom only when the trying rested. The street sweeper the world had never looked at, who was seen. The golden deer who walked toward rather than away and changed a kingdom. And now a child in the dark in a charnel ground, who found that from the worst possible beginning, the path is completely open. The teaching that moves through all 10 is the same. The harder you try to force the outcome, the further it moves. The mind gripping cannot see clearly. The body running cannot find stillness. There is a quality of attention, patient, unforced, not grasping at results, that makes everything in these stories possible. And it is available from wherever you are sitting right now, not from somewhere better, not after some condition is met. From here, from exactly here, you are somewhere right now, wherever that is, whatever is present in this moment, whatever has been left behind, whatever is unresolved, whatever verdict is still echoing, that is the charnel ground. That is the exact place where the practice happens. Not after things improve, not once the difficulty passes. The charnel ground was not a detour on the way to the practice. It was where the practice happened. The kitchen was not outside the teaching. The ocean with no visible shore was not a problem to solve before anything could begin. The street on which Sunita swept was the road where the path opened. Each of these was the place, because there is no other kind. What the stepfather decided when he let go of the hand in the dark, he was wrong, not about the circumstances. The circumstances were exactly as difficult as he believed they were. He was wrong about what the circumstances determined. He thought they closed the future. They were the beginning of the practice. If there is something in your life that feels like a charnel ground, a place where something has been lost, or a version of a future that no longer holds, or a part of yourself that has been left somewhere you cannot quite return to, this teaching does not ask you to be grateful for it. It does not ask you to reframe it as a gift. It simply says, you are already there. You are already in the one place the practice needs. And the practice is not something waiting in a better place. It is something that begins in the conditions that are actually present, with the mind you have right now, in the breath that is already happening. Sapaka did not leave the charnel ground and then begin to practice. He sat down where he was and began to practice. The place did not change. The practice opened. What does the practice look like from here? The next breath, noticed. The feeling of the body where it is, noticed. The weight of this night, the stories heard, the moments of recognition, the places where something landed and the places where it did not, noticed without needing to resolve any of it. The practice does not need resolution. It needs presence. And presence is available in the next breath, quietly, without any special preparation. No one outside you decides your path. The child in the charnel ground came to understand this not through being told it as a comfort, but through the specific, lived experience of a mind turning toward its own nature and finding it free. That experience is available to you. It has always been available to you. It is available right now, in this breath, in this moment, in the exact place where you are. The path opens from here. It has been open all along. And these 10 stories have been 10 ways of pointing at the same opening, hoping that one of them reaches the place where you are sitting tonight. Take whatever landed. That is enough. That is the whole teaching. What remains now is not another story. What remains is the quiet after the stories, the space where all the walking ends, and you are allowed to simply be where you are, without going anywhere at all.